Hi guys, just so you know, this video does not contain spoilers for Borderlands 3. So, the game comes out in a few days, and Gearbox and 2K UK were very kind in sharing a review code with me for the game, so I could give you guys an early insight into what the game is like. Now, I haven't been paid to make this video, I want to make that clear. I've just received a copy of the game, and from there been told to pretty much do whatever I like. Now, I'll be avoiding spoiler missions, locations, and bosses and stuff like that in this video, but rest assured, I have completed the whole game's story, and I've played as multiple Vault Hunters, so I could try the different playstyles that come with each one. In this video, I'll be breaking down my honest first impressions to try my best to give you a comprehensive overview of what the game offers as a whole, and generally get into some of the details that might not have really been so clear before this point in time. Let's start with the Vault Hunters, the poster people of Borderlands 3. So far, I'm really happy with how each of them feels. I've got the most playtime on Flak, but I have played the other three to varying points in the story, and I think they all have some great builds and interesting kind of combos you can do distributed amongst their different skill trees. And those skill trees and combos and builds only get more interesting as the game progresses into the endgame as well, which I'll be talking about later. Flak also felt especially good for someone playing mostly solo, which I was doing most of the time throughout my play sessions, as they're joined by a pet in battle, and it helps makes the world just a little bit more friendly when you've got a pet skag or something who you can keep around for the whole campaign if you see fit. That said, the others work fine in solo too, don't get me wrong, it's just that it was nice having a companion, and each Vault Hunter obviously works fine in co-op too. The co-op features in Borderlands 3 absolutely dwarf those from the previous games, alongside a couple of things I thought I might never see in a Borderlands game, like actual matchmaking. That was a real nice surprise. You also have the option to send your friends weapons, you can check how far through the story your friends are, you can let them know what you're looking for in terms of support if you're doing a campaign mission or a loot farm or a boss run. And do you remember also in the old Borderlands games, if you were even just 1 or 2 levels lower than your friends, how you'd basically not really be able to play with them? And do you remember also how it would be such a nightmare if someone in your 4-player co-op group decided that they were going to play a bit while the rest of you were offline, and then your flow through the story was kind of ruined? Do you remember those problems? They feel like they're pretty much all gone in Borderlands 3. There are a lot of quality of life improvements, which I'll be talking about again in a little bit, but certainly in terms of player progression, it felt a lot smoother here, and in the context of co-op, that made a huge difference to my Borderlands experience. I imagine all those above features that I just mentioned will be especially useful once people start getting through the main story and getting to the endgame activities like Mayhem Mode, the Circle of Slaughter, Proving Grounds, or Borderlands' signature New Game Plus, which is called TVHM, or True Vault Hunter Mode. Again, we'll come back to that in a little bit. First though, let's talk campaign. Now, I'm going to kind of split this in two, because the humor is really important in Borderlands, but underneath the humor, there's a really important story thread as well, which needs to be addressed. So, the humor in previous Borderlands games is definitely back here. So if you still find yourself laughing at some of the silliness that's in Borderlands 2, you should feel really comfortable with the tone in 3. I think in 2019, it's easy to get sucked into a pretty cynical mindset about humor of this type. It feels like the fastest way to be cool about something this year is to dislike something, and a lot of the jokes in Borderlands 3 aren't really that smart, and they're not really that different to a lot of the ones that we were told several years ago in 2. But I would argue that that's exactly what Borderlands fans want. More of that kind of bottom of the barrel, fart joke type humor mixed in with some really delicious sarcasm, and I mean, it's definitely not the sort of thing that you'd expect to see in a game like a Destiny or a The Division for sure, but that's not what people are coming to this series and expecting, so it pretty much hit the nail on the head where it needed to, in my opinion. There were absolutely some moments where some jokes didn't land, and I was kind of left half smiling, going, how long is this gonna go on for, this gag? But the same happened to me in previous Borderlands games, and I expect it to in future Borderlands games as well. These jokes don't always hit. They don't always land in the right way, but when they do, they are absolutely great. And I mean, there are multiple moments throughout this game's story where I was just sitting there chuckling playing the game because of how unexpected a character line was, or how plain silly it was, or just the sheer level of insanity of all of it. That's kind of the humor covered. I think the narrative is also in a good place as well. Now, when I interviewed Randy Varnell for my Borderlands 3 documentary that I made before launch, he told me that one of the core themes of the game's narrative would be families, both those you like and that you're attached to very much, and those that you hate but are kind of stuck with. Now, this definitely shone through throughout my time playing the game, and in my 22-ish hour jaunt through the story, it became more and more clear that the writers had basically made a choice to try and drill down into the different family arcs present in the Borderlands universe during each of the game's acts. Now, there is a small downside to this, and that's that Borderlands 3 suffers a tiny bit from having too many super likable characters. And what I mean by that is that in the previous games, we had some fantastic characters introduced that the community really warmed to, and now Borderlands 3 has to basically pick up the pieces and reintroduce a lot of those people in order to explore arcs with them. And that takes a little bit of time, which is at first just a little bit slow. But once it gets moving, it feels like it hits a really good rhythm, and I think that the story is structured quite well as well, so you always have a pretty good idea of what the Crimson Raiders are going to be up to next. This is probably overall the story that I've enjoyed the most out of the Borderlands games. I think that that's a fair statement. Now, I would exclude Tales from that just because I don't think you can really compare the games. They're just too different. But this game felt like it chose its kind of battle and fought it well, and it also struck more of an emotional chord than some moments in the previous games did for me. I think that the Borderlands series has always had quite a unique and charming way of dealing with topics like death and sadness, and I think Borderlands 3 does a really, really nice job of it. Now, there are some things here that I'd love to say about certain characters that might have met untimely fates in previous games. I want to be spoiler free, so I'm going to avoid saying any names, but there are characters in previous Borderlands games who have died. And the way some of those characters are honored in this game, I felt was really touching, and it was done in a way that I felt was kind of a perfect acknowledgement of the past while keeping things moving without getting stuck in the emotional baggage that we've been kind of holding on to since 2012 or before. I think that you could misinterpret what I'm saying here as Borderlands 3 kind of pulling its punches and not really dealing with some of that trauma from the past, but I think this is actually a really nice and respectful way to have dealt with it, and I'm glad that this is the route that they chose. Now, talking of sadness, there are new villains in Borderlands 3. Their names are Tyreen and Troy. They're also known as the Calypso twins. And honestly, I felt kind of weird about them as villains. I mean, they're kind of hard to dislike at first. Like, you think that they're kind of assholes, but you don't really think of them so much as villains. And they do continue to kind of jaunt and jab and taunt you throughout the story, but it all feels a little bit toothless, as I think I saw Polygon put it. I think that's a good way of putting it here. It never really feels like they sink their teeth into you beyond certain individual remarks that they might make that you might resent, but as characters, they're just not on the level of Handsome Jack, which is a bar that is incredibly high. I think that Handsome Jack is one of the best video game villains of all time, and so I didn't really expect them to reach those heights, but I know the comparison is going to be made, and so I would have to say, I think that Jack probably wins out versus the Calypsos for me. The fact that the game kind of explores different families and their own arcs as well throughout the acts also means that other characters kind of need to be introduced as their own villains in their own right, and while that's great because I'm a big lore nerd, man, I love that sort of stuff, and so learning about all these different characters' families is fantastic for me, whether they like their relatives or not. It does mean that a little bit of time in the spotlight is taken away from the Calypso twins, which maybe hurts their character development a little bit. There's also a cameo kind of thing for one of the bosses in the game that I'm going to say very little more about because I don't want to spoil anything, but I think it's going to be a bit of a love-hate kind of thing where if you like the reference that's being made. I don't want to say much more, but if you like that reference and you like that thing that they did, then you're going to be really, really impressed with a certain sequence. And if not, you might think that it's extremely corny. It's just something that I figured I should point out. Now, in terms of the kind of Borderlands DNA, if anyone is concerned, there are plenty of fart jokes. There are plenty of fourth wall breaks. The pop culture references are back and at the heart of everything in the game, including the weapons, which we'll get onto in a second. And it really does feel like this is an extension of Borderlands 2, but with some of those quality of life upgrades that I mentioned I was very appreciative of a moment ago. Some of those include being able to just fast travel to your vehicle from any point on the map. It saves a lot of running around. And fast traveling to fast travel points from any point on the map is also a huge addition that sounds like a small thing, but if you've played a lot of Borderlands 2, you know that you have to do a lot of running around in that game just to get from point A to point B, and you are much more zippy in this one. There's also not ever too much space between fast travel points. I think that sometimes the map can be a little bit intimidating because it looks like it's massive, but realistically, if the game is making you run from one point to another and there's a fair bit of ground to cover, it's gonna give you something to do while you're going. So for example, you might have one of those siren visions in front of you from Lilith, or you might hear from a different character over the Echo Net, or something like that. There seems to always be a lot of filler dialogue and audio happening to keep you kind of engrossed in the game, even in the couple of moments where it's making you just kind of do grunt work and run around for a little bit. There are plenty more quality of life upgrades as well that I'm not going to be able to get into here just for the sake of time, but one other one that I thought was really cool is the fact that if you have a really cool gun come out of a boss now, but it slips down a cliff into the abyss, you'll be able to get that weapon back from a machine in Sanctuary. So those lost guns won't actually be lost anymore. The last thing I'll say is that there's a pinging system. In a Borderlands game, there's a pinging system. It's pretty crazy. The mission design is another one that really felt just like Borderlands all over again, which I was very happy with. You will go up to an NPC, they'll give you a quest, it'll be a pretty straightforward little objective, and they'll talk to you while you're doing it, again, over the Echo Net, maybe give you some updates, maybe give you new locations to go to. And while the animations of the NPCs that you're getting side quests from or walking and talking to in the game aren't incredible, that wasn't a problem for me. It's Borderlands. I don't care. That's not what I'm here for. As far as I'm concerned, it looks a little dated, sure, but that isn't a bad thing for me. Now, what doesn't look dated, what actually looks absolutely gorgeous, is the guns, man. Holy moly. Borderlands has always been known for it, right? I mean, that's no surprise to anyone. But the fact that in this game, every single gun that I picked up, every single one, felt like it had been handcrafted, despite the fact that there are billions of the damn things, was really impressive. And I feel like the level up curve as well of guns getting more powerful and starting to get cool effects on the guns too, getting cool attributes, that was a really enjoyable experience. I really enjoyed going from level 1 all the way up to finishing the story kind of in the 30s where you would normally expect to finish a Borderlands campaign. And the whole time I was changing up the guns I was using. I wasn't just sticking with one type of loadout forever. I was changing my skill tree. I was really mixing up my playstyle, and I imagine that as I get deeper into the endgame, I would continue to be able to do that. Which brings us on to Endgame. The Endgame in Borderlands 3 looks like at launch it's going to do a pretty good job of keeping Borderlands fans entertained. However, I want to be clear that if you're going into this game expecting a Destiny-style endgame, then you're looking at it completely wrong, and you're probably going to set yourself up to dislike the game based on a Destiny criteria. The kind of crux of the endgame is the same as in previous Borderlands games, which is that you want to level up as much as you can. You unlock an extra leveling system once you beat the story, and that means that you can get even more buffs for your character, which makes your ability to customize your kind of build even more intricate. But beyond that, you have a variety of different options that might or might not appeal. So if you want to try and get every damn gun in the game, I mean, that's never going to happen, but if you're trying to grind out all the legendaries from all the bosses, for example, you're absolutely able to do that. You can farm bosses really easily in Borderlands 3, and they've added quality of life improvements there so that when you save and quit, you quit back to main menu and then you reload in, you're able to reload in at the the nearest respawn point that you activated right next to whatever boss encounter you're trying to farm, and it means that the farming process is really, really quick. There's also True Vault Hunter mode, which I mentioned, which ups the difficulty, basically gives you an entirely new campaign to play through because there's new enemies and stuff like that in there as well, as you would expect from a New Game Plus. But this time they've also got Mayhem mode, which has various tiers. There are 3 in at launch, and this basically feels like Torments from Diablo. Now, it's too early for me to say right now whether or not this system is going to flourish at launch or if it's just not going to feel fun. And that's why I'm going to probably end up making a follow-up video to this one in a couple of days or next week or the next couple of weeks, basically giving you an idea of whether the end game really clicks or not. There are other extra layers that they've also added in this time. There are proving grounds, there's the Circle of Slaughter. These are basically just ways of giving you even more activities to do when you do reach the end game. You've also got an extra wrinkle to the way guns work. So normally you'd expect to get, whether it's your legendaries or your rainbow guns, your pearlescence or whatever. In this, there's also anointed weapons, which basically are an extra random stat roll that could apply to a gun. And again, it's something that you have no doubt seen in other looters, but the Borderlands I don't think has really seen this way before. It's something that I think might have originated back in the World of Warcraft days, and it will hopefully mean, and I imagine it will mean, that the grind for loot will go even further and be even more satisfying when it does, because it will in turn unlock new things that your character wouldn't have necessarily been able to do in terms of, again, builds, playstyles, things like that. The overall verdict from me is that I really enjoyed my time with Borderlands 3, but I have to say, it's a Borderlands game, and there are people out there that are going towards this game imagining it's Destiny, and it isn't. And if you go in, like I said, and you apply the criteria of what makes Destiny good to Borderlands 3, you're going to be a bit confused because they are very different games despite both being looter shooters. I think that the Borderlands community and everyone that has played Borderlands 2 for years and years and logged in for the Commander Lilith DLC and all of that is going to absolutely love this game to pieces. I think that it's going to completely hit the mark that it needs to. And for that, I've got to say congrats to Gearbox and to 2K, and hopefully you feel that this video has been kind of accurate and given you a bit of a more in-depth idea about whether this is a game that you might want to pick up. I would recommend it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to follow throughout the year as well. I think that they're going to be doing a lot of interesting DLC stuff. There's going to be a lot of support behind this game because there's so much work going into it in the first place, and the community is so hungry for more Borderlands. And so, yeah, this is a ship that would be worth getting on if you have the opportunity. That's going to wrap it up from me, though. Thanks for watching. Thank you again, 2K, for the code, and I'll see you guys very soon in some more Borderlands videos. Bye for now.